Everyone, I'm the Basmata Kanungo, and we will be learning about the Mughal Empire today. This presentation is done by Shreya Sharma, and this is just the first part of your chapter about the Mughal Empire. If I speak too quickly, feel free to slow down the recording on YouTube and go ahead with the chapter. So we're gonna get started. Okay. So let's go over some of the introduction about the Mughal Empire. So there were three empires in the history of India. There was the Maurya Empire, the Gupta Empire, and then the Mughal Empire. Babur invaded India in 1526 and after overthrowing the Delhi Sultanate, established the Mughal rule. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, the third part of it, the Mughal Empire. And the Mughal Empire was established by this guy named Babur in 1526. And he did that by basically coming in with an army and taking over the Delhi Sultanate, or the rule of Delhi at the time. This over here is Babur, and he was the founder of the Mughal dynasty, and he belonged to the Mongol race. So the word Mughal actually comes from the word Mongol. He used to rule this small region in Afghanistan called Kabul, which still exists, and while he was ruling this small, tiny area in Afghanistan called Kabul, he was waiting for an opportunity to attack India, because India has always been really rich and prosperous because of all these raw materials and gold and everything that we have. So some things that were introduced to India by Babur was rose. So by taking advantage of the weaknesses of the Delhi sultans, so basically whoever was ruling Delhi at the time, Babur invaded Delhi and then ended their rule in Delhi and took over. But he didn't want to stop in Delhi. What he wanted was a lot more land. So he then wanted to take over other areas, because he knew that the Rajputs and the Afghans did not like him and they resisted him. So being how strong and powerful he was with the amount of weapons and the army, he had, even at that time, he had to go back because the Rajputs and the Afghans were really, really strong. So after Babur conquered Delhi, Agra and their surrounding areas, he also conquered those areas and then established his kingdom. So now he has Delhi, Agra, and then little areas around these two. But as soon as he conquered these areas of like Delhi and Agra and these areas around them, he died. But his son, Humayun, then took over the throne. So he became the ruler of the Mughal Empire at this time. So this is Humayun. So Humayun, what he did was he overpowered his enemies in the beginning, but towards the end of it, he had to face defeat because of the Afghan chieftain Sher Shah Suri. So even though he won a lot of battles at the beginning of his rule, the Afghan chieftain defeated him. And after he lost his kingdom to Sher Shah Suri, he went to Persia and stayed there for 15 years. And when the Afghan rule in India weakened again, Humayun came back and invaded India and then conquered Delhi again. So that's something about Humayun. Persia is it was the area which is now called Iran, or it's around Iran, so it's just Middle East. However, after he conquered Delhi, he died very quickly. So just like his father, after he conquered Delhi and parts of India, he died. Akbar was Humayun's son, and he had always wanted to build this very large empire in India. And we all know about Akbar, we always read about him, right? So because he wanted to build this large empire, what he did was he wanted to pursue these Rajput kings to come and support him. So he took a completely different approach than his father and his grandfather. What he did was, instead of fight a war or fight a battle with the Rajputs, he went on to try to convince them and ask them to join hands with him. So basically form an alliance, so form a team together. But Rana Pratap Singh of Mewar opposed Akbar. He was a brave warrior, and he was also a Rajput, and he did not want to join hands and support Akbar. He wanted to fight a battle. So there was a fierce battle between Rana Pratap Singh of Mewar and Akbar, which happened in Rajasthan, and we learn about this, right, in history. And this battle happened in Haldi Ghati, which is in Rajasthan. And although Rana Pratap Singh was defeated in the battle, he did not bow down to Akbar. So even though he lost the battle, he refused to accept defeat and bow down to Akbar. So what Akbar did was he got involved in these military campaigns for a lot of years. So because of involving himself in these years, that's why we have, that's why he conquered these other places like Gujarat, Bengal, Kashmir, Kabul, and other areas. And then he built an even larger empire. So as years are going down, Akbar's empire is growing. So we're going to talk about some of Akbar's achievements because he was a very well-known and well-loved king at the time. So his administration, Akbar's administration, Akbar was a very able administrator. Able meaning he was very talented and he knew what he wanted and he knew how to get it, and he was very broad-minded and accepting. So he had a lot of good qualities to be a good king. And he was not a despotic ruler. So a despotic ruler is someone that's kind of tyrannical or has really hard rules, or is a tyrant, is basically really mean and kills people and only allows them to live in the area if they follow his rules. But he was not like that. He was very accepting. So he was really smart too, right? So he knew that in order for him to keep his big empire, it was necessary for him to win the trust of his Hindu subjects who formed a majority, because Akbar was Muslim. So what he did was he appointed Hindus to high posts in the court. And he withdrew the personal tax called jizya, which was imposed by earlier Muslim kings on Hindus, and it also levied pilgrimage centers. So what happened was the earlier kings, so his father and grandfather, used to tax Hindu people in the region because they were Muslim kings and that's how they got their money. But Akbar was really smart, and he knew that if he had to get the support of the Hindu people in the area, he just had to take the tax away, which is what he did. And this went really well in the kingdom. So he was really accepted in this land, and this was framed by his revenue minister Raja Tandarmal, who is Hindu. So Akbar's religious policy was really easy. So he was very tolerant of other religions. So he didn't want everyone in his kingdom to be Muslim. He wanted everyone to practice whatever religion they practiced. He didn't really care as much as they supported him. So he constructed this prayer hall called Ibadat Khana in his new capital, Fatehpur Sikri. And you can go and see this, where he discussed religious matters with leaders of various Islamic sects. And he invited Hindu, Jain, Buddhist, Parsi, and Christian leaders to discuss their views on these religious issues. So basically everyone, regardless of what religion they were invited into this kingdom, and given respect and given space to share their views. So as a result of these discussions, he evolved a new sect called Din-e-Ilahi, and it incorporated some of the best principles of different religions. So basically he created a new religion kind of thing, which incorporated all the good parts of all the other religions. But it only attracted very limited amount of followers, so it didn't really go ahead and become bigger. This is a picture of Ibadat Khana, and you can see it if you go to Fatehpur Sikri. So, and this is a picture of Akbar at a session in the Ibadat Khana. It's just a drawing, it's not a real picture. So this is Birbal. We've all heard stories about Birbal, right? Akbar was a big patronage to the arts kind of a guy, so he really patronized literature and art. And patronized basically means that he supported literature and art. So Faizi, Abdul Fazal, and Birbal were distinguished poets in his court, and they were received with a lot of respect in his court. And there was also this singer called Tansen in his court, and you'll learn more about him as the chapters go on. And Akbar had a lot of contribution to architectures and paintings because he was such a supporter of the arts and literature. And like we said, there's a lot of pretty places and buildings that he made that are still there. There's Jahangir atop, and then below him is Shah Jahan. So we all know who these two are. So Jahangir and Shah Jahan were successors to Akbar, and they continued his policies. And so it was his kid and then his grandkid. So basically Jahangir was Akbar's child and Shah Jahan was Jahangir's child. Shah Jahan built the Taj Mahal, and we all know about the Taj Mahal, and the Mammoth Red Fort at Delhi, and other very, very beautiful places that we know about him. And both of them followed a lot of the rules that Akbar had made, and so they were also successful rulers. Then there's Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb is Shah Jahan's son. And he was also a very well-known Mughal empire, and he was the last well-known Mughal empire, and he ruled for around 50 years. And during his rule, the empire grew even more in the beginning, but towards the end of his rule, it really declined and went to become a very small area, and that's why we don't really know any rulers past Aurangzeb. So there's some religious policies under Aurangzeb, so I'm going to go over that. Aurangzeb, unlike his fathers and forefathers, so unlike Akbar, Jahangir, and Shah Jahan, was very orthodox Muslim. He stayed away from drinking wine, gambling, entertainment, and music. He lived a very, very simple life. And he gave up the liberal policy of Akbar, so he wasn't like him. He reimposed jizya, which is the tax that was on Hindus, and as he did this, there were a lot of more political rebellions because Hindus were mad. They've been living the past 3 generations not paying taxes, and suddenly this Aurangzeb is coming on and saying you have to pay in order to be Hindu, and they did not like that. This is Guru Tegh Bahadur, and we're going to talk about the Sikh rebellion. So the Sikhs were provoked by Aurangzeb's religious policy, and rightfully so, because they were mad that just because they were not Muslim, they had to pay a tax. And the Sikh Guru Tegh Bahadur was publicly executed in Delhi. So executed means killed in front of everyone against their own will. And his son Guru Govind Simha organized the Sikh community into a militant sect. So these members were designated as Singhs, or Singhs are lions. Militant basically means someone that's willing to kill or fight. And they had to possess the 5 Ks at all times. So they were Kesh, which is long hair, Kanga, which is comb, Kirpan, which is sword, Kancha, which is a pair of knickerboxers, and Kara, which is a steel bracelet. And you would needed to have these 5 Ks at all times in order to be a Sikh. And this custom is still very, very prevalent among Sikhs today. So if you go to a Gurudwara and they're Sikh, they'll probably still have all these 5 Ks. So let's talk about rebellions for a second. The Sikhs and the Rajputs strongly opposed Aurangzeb in North India. And Shivaji rose to revolt in the Deccan, which is the Deccan area is basically the bottom, like it's the Deccan Plateau. It's like the bottom area of India. And these revolts continued for a very, very long time. And as a result, Aurangzeb lost a lot of money and so much of his army and his prestige that he had. So many provinces of his empire then became free, so they were no longer his empire or part of his empire. And the Deccan Wars also took Aurangzeb's economic power, so his money and his military strength. So they took away his money and his army. And he was so exhausted that he died in the Deccan. And with his death, the Mughal Empire was greatly weakened. So after Aurangzeb's death, the Mughal Empire was very weak and little and didn't matter as much. That was the last of part 1 of the Mughal Empire. We will talk more about the Mughal Empire in the next part of this chapter. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something new. I will see you guys in the next video.